Before we delve into questions, I'd like each of the panelists to introduce themselves and how they orient to this topic of artificial intelligence, as well as the intersection of AI and intellectual property. Please.
Thank you so much. I'm Blaise Agueda-Iarcas. I am a vice president at Google and fellow, and the CTO of Technology and Society. Have been involved in the development of large language models from their very early days and other kinds of AI. And also am the inventor of federated learning and of a variety of other techniques for doing large-scale machine learning while respecting user privacy. Have been thinking a lot about, for many years about how data, privacy, rights, and the potentials of machine learning can really come together to make society better as a whole. And this question of IP, how it works socially, how it's constituted, and how it is that we're going to evolve as a hybrid, human and AI society over the coming century is one that is really close to my heart. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, and let me just ask a follow-up question there. You said you've been there since the beginning. So I know I was developing AI in the 90s for aircraft. So
you win.
I was. I win. Okay, that's all I wanted to establish. Next.
No, I'm good. I think I have mine. Thank you. Glad to be here. Keith Stryer, Vice President of Worldwide AI Initiatives and Global Head of Public Sector at NVIDIA. I did study intellectual property law when I was a law student back in the 90s, but I do not sit in our legal affairs department, and I don't have responsibility for those positions. But as the primary interface for foreign governments across the world for NVIDIA, obviously these topics come up. And it's important to stay on top of them. But I also, outside of my daily responsibilities, I also sit on the National AI Advisory Committee for President Biden, and actually a few other national AI committees, like Australia's National AI Committee as well. And so again, these are very global conversations, very global topics, and it's important to have this kind of dialogue.
Danielle?
Thank you so much for your comments at the top of this session. Really appreciate what you were saying. My name is Danielle Gilliam-Moore. I'm the Director of Global Public Policy for Salesforce. And so I'm basically responsible for ensuring that Salesforce has clear and consistent policy recommendations around a lot of different issues. But these days, I am basically all AI all the time. And so Salesforce, why are we up here? We are a B2B software company. So we're working with businesses. So while we're not really necessarily consumer facing, what we're trying to do is help companies, many that you all use, or maybe you work for them, how to interact with their customers, how to ensure that their sales team or their marketing team or their service team is providing really efficient services to you all. And so now we're trying to use AI to help them be even more efficient. So a bit different of a perspective than some of the other companies, because we're really working with businesses.
Great. Maria?
Great. I am Maria Laitinen. I am Senior Director in our Government Affairs team. I am responsible for the AI governance and partnerships or driving these efforts across EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I joined Microsoft in 2000, and I was initially responsible for our IP enforcement program. So you can imagine, I have kind of gone the full circle. So copyright, especially copyright, has been something that is very dear to me. And of course, Microsoft has been protecting copyrights, and it's important. So the conversation that we're having today is going to be very exciting. In my current role, I think the exciting piece is that we need to strike the right balance between regulation and innovation. And I think that requires input from all different audiences. So it's very, very exciting and important to have these conversations. And I hope this will be a very lively dialogue today.
Appreciate that. So you've got some great panelists here. So remember those questions that you can ask. I will say that we heard in the opening session about how AI has evolved over the last 10 years. I mean, it's blown Moore's Law out of the water. It's crazy. So given where we are now with generative AI, that seems relatively new. We know AI has been around for a long time, but now we've got generative AI, we've got the explosion of AI. Where do we go from here? What are the things you're focused on? Let me start with Danielle on that one.
Yeah, thank you so much. Salesforce is really focused on pushing a larger conversation, a public-private partnership, if you will. In my conversations with governments in Southeast Asia recently, what I heard was a lot of questions about what are other countries doing. And so when the US or even European Commission puts out consultations, we think that's a good thing because it allows for civil society and the private sector alike to provide their viewpoint on whatever is being queried at that point. But then I think the knock-on effect, not just in that market, but in other markets, is that they're able to see what are companies really concerned about? What does civil society view as the real issues that need to be tackled, either by a framework or regulation? So Salesforce is really concerned with engaging in these global conversations with the hope that it actually engenders a global consensus around some of these core topics in AI, which is not just an issue of a sovereign issue. It's something that is a global issue.
And that's fantastic. We were talking a little bit earlier that everything we do in US government is with consultation right now. We seek stakeholder feedback. I mentioned that oftentimes when we get stakeholder feedback, it tends to be pretty binary. Everybody wants to advocate for exactly what's best for their industry. We want that. We want to hear where everybody stands. And that it's through getting everyone in the room that we can try and solve for all of these issues for everyone. So that's been extremely productive. And one thing Danielle said that was really important is when you submit your comments, we request comments all the time. Everything we've done, including our inventorship guidance, was built on those comments. But when you submit those comments, you now have a place in the room. So yeah.
We view those consultations as kind of our admittance ticket into the room. And then we really appreciate when the governments come back to us and say, okay, let's talk about this a bit more. Let's get you in the room with other companies. Because then once you have the conversation, we have our initial position, but that position can change or it can flex depending upon really what is the consensus of the room and what are the actual goals. So this, I think, has to be a robust process. It's not just a single consultation that happens and then that's it. It should be a consultation followed by several conversations.
And Keith, you mentioned that you're on Nyak, a committee with the Biden administration. You also mentioned that you're involved in similar activities in other countries. Can you tell us a little bit about what Nyak is, what role it plays with regard to artificial intelligence? And then from there, can you explain the role in other countries and the work that we're doing internationally in this space?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't spent my whole career in AI. I was in technology strategy, and AI really hit my radar around 2016. And I think it hit a lot of people's radars around then. That's kind of when it became a global policy conversation. So before that, it was more of a technical conversation. There was a few companies that were clearly ahead of the curve and making some ground. But 2016 at the World Economic Forum was one of the things that kind of put it on the radar that January with the Fourth Industrial Revolution white paper. And then a few other things happened that year. But that was the year it really started to gain momentum. And of course, Canada was the first country to issue a national AI strategy in 2017. And it was in that time period that it kind of hit my radar. And I ended up becoming one of the first advisors to countries on those kinds of strategies. I worked with Estonia and Malta and a few others. And then I realized this is what I want to do. And NVIDIA, for those, hopefully some of you heard of NVIDIA, it's kind of a small chip company.
And you saw Jensen, hopefully, in the opening sessions.
Hopefully I had a chance to see him because it's his first time here and had a great experience, great opportunity to sit with the minister and have a great conversation. NVIDIA is not a chip company. It's not a gaming company. It's a computing company. And Jensen had this incredible vision 30 years ago to create this full stack, end-to-end software, hardware, computing platform to accelerate the workloads that would solve complex problems. And it started out with graphics, and here we are 35 years later, and we've, AI. But that, if you don't have, and something you said stayed with me when you mentioned the PTO as the innovation agency, right? If you don't have access to things, that's about unlocking human potential, right?
Yes.
Right. Innovation is about unlocking human potential. We kind of look at it the same way, and I think countries have as well. If you go back to the last couple of years, well, last 7 years of these national AI strategies, it's really about harnessing this new technology to unlock human potential, doing it in a responsible and safe way, but nonetheless, unlocking that potential. The U.S. was not the first to have a strategy at all. I don't even know what number it was in the list, but I would say the U.S. was a little bit late in some respects, but has done a really great job since then. And when countries ask me, are we ahead, are we behind? I have this conversation every week. Who's leading? I say it doesn't really matter. When you got in the game, it doesn't matter at all. All that matters is you take it seriously, you do it very thoughtfully, that you line up, you ask the right questions. And every country, and there's 60 or 70 now that are actively implementing their national AI strategies, they're all doing it in kind of different ways. And so there's I think benchmarking indexing is not really that useful. The US, though, has done a really good job in the last few years, really embracing this technology at a very high level. And we have a very strong, robust private sector that obviously, kind of leads the way for the world in many respects. The National AI Advisory Committee, which operates under the auspices of the Commerce Department and Secretary Raimondo, was set up to advise the President and the Congress and other leaders. It's one of multiple sort of consultative bodies that I think exist now, in that capacity. And it's tried to navigate it very, as quickly as best it can. But one last point is that when Nyak was set up, and this is one of the challenges of this whole idea of just having an AI strategy and keeping up. When Nyak was established 2 years ago, there was no conversation on generative AI. There was no ChatGPT publicly. It was in development since 2016, but no one knew about it. And when we went down that path, we were focused on other things. We had other priorities at the time, and suddenly this hits the radar. We're like, are we even relevant anymore? Are we focused on the right things? And so, clearly, the committee and all countries have had to grapple with this. And I think of it as sort of pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT. And since November of 2022, the world has pivoted, and this is now a policy imperative for everybody, including the country we're sitting in. And it's really quite impressive how it has equalized and the level of awareness across the world.
One, you bring up something that was also mentioned in the opening sessions about more democratizing innovation, democratizing the use of AI. And I want to sit on that for a second, because to me that's critically important. So we were at the White House last week with Secretary Raimondo, and we rolled out the United States National Entrepreneurship Strategy. And there's a lot of great stuff in there, and we're going to start implementing immediately. But none of that is going to happen. We're not going to bring more people into the innovation ecosystem. We're not going to create more companies if people don't have access to AI. The one thing we hear from startups is they need the technology and they need the data set. So I'd like to start either with you, Blaise, or with Maria on what are your companies doing about that?
I think the question on how do we get this information to everyone is key. First of all, we definitely need to democratize not AI only, but the data. So access to data is going to be key in these public-private partnerships. I think that should be the leading theme when we are working on it. Microsoft is active on a number of fronts, providing assistance to different groups. But I feel that the bottom line is that when our technology is when it's changing the world, we need to be part of the discussions where we take the responsibility for that technology that we are creating. So I feel that data is one thing, being responsible about it is definitely included, but to move on this front and get the data to everyone, it requires the full house.
Well, I appreciate that. And I will say Microsoft and Google announced that they're willing to indemnify those who use their AI from IP infringement. So,
sorry, Kathy, can I add regarding that?
Yeah, please.
Just to talk about why we feel so strongly about the trust that we have in this technology, that we need to make sure that we have our customers back. And that means that when they are using our tools, we went out, and as of the 1st of December, we have the customer AI copyright customer commitments that indemnify the customer that is using the output of our Copilot products, as well as the Azure OpenAI services, our key products with certain mitigations that they need to take with Azure OpenAI. With Copilot, it's all built in. We have their back in terms of if somebody claims that that is producing an output that is infringing. So the truth is that we trust the technology so much, and we understand there is a lot of insecurity among the customers' concerns and worries, that we want to make sure that we are holding their hand in that and being the trusted partner in the process.
Well, and to some extent, that does open up access, right? Because you've got smaller players who may be less sophisticated. They may not want to get into a legal battle that they can't afford, and knowing they're going to be indemnified could be helpful. So Blaise, why don't you tell us, maybe you can build off of that with what Google is doing.
Of course. Well, one of the things that I guess I should point out here is that I have a personal view about how innovation works.
Great.
Which has to do with, less like something springing out of an individual's mind and more with intersections between ideas. It's almost like, all of our minds are vessels where, cultural currents, previous inventions, previous ideas come together and cross-fertilize and something new comes out. Nothing ever came out of nothing. And there's this wonderful paper by Robert Merton, the sociologist, I think it's from the 1970s, about multiple discovery, which I'm sure you're at the USPTO you're very familiar with. The idea that basically, as if telepathically, every invention seems to crop up simultaneously from a dozen inventors at once at the same time, as if everybody's kind of tuned into some weird ESP. And of course, the reason for that, so there's so many examples. The light bulb, is invented, a dozen times within a few years of each other by people who are not in direct contact with each other. But that's because in order to have a light bulb, you have to have a society that knows how to blow glass, that has figured out electricity, that is able to draw tungsten filaments and so on. And once all of those preconditions are there, it's inevitable that the light bulb will happen, and that it'll happen in anybody's mind who is prepared and who is subject to all of those currents. But that doesn't mean that they're all equivalent. One of those light bulbs used a screw, screw connector, and one used a prong, and one used one design of filament, and one used another, and so on. And in a way, the whole history of commerce and of culture is about which of those decisions end up being the definitive ones, or which ones get carried forward. Does the writing system go from right to left, or from left to right? I guess this is a long-winded way of saying that the cool thing about the way AI has arisen is that it hasn't come through some kind of optimal game player that suddenly wakes up one day and talks to you. It's actually literally a distillation of human culture, and it allows people to cross-fertilize whatever is in their own heads, whatever their own inspiration is, with an enormous body of other human work that has happened historically. In that sense, it's a connectivity thing. The intelligence is not artificial; it's human, or more than human. In the sense that everything that is in those models is human culture. I actually feel like if I have one difference with the usual Western way of thinking about individualism, it's that intelligence is absolutely a collective effect. It's not an individualistic one. Of course, we all have the right to our own intellectual property and to monetize it and so on. But also everything that we do is standing on the shoulders of the entire civilization, which is increasingly a global one.
Well, and that brings up a number of different things. One, I actually have the Edison light bulb on my desk at work, which is just phenomenal. So
best paperweight ever.
Yeah, I don't know. You used to have to submit an actual model when you applied for a patent. Yes. So, but I love it because the one thing that I always tell people, because people think I'm not an inventor because whatever I invented was obvious. It's Edison is credited with inventing the light bulb, and he just invented a better filament. So it just shows you the type of innovation that we can patent. To your point about simultaneous invention, so I'd like to get back to IP on this because we thought about that when we developed the guidance that we just put out today on inventorship. And the concern we had is we wanted to strike the right balance where we're continuing to incentivize human ingenuity and that investment in R&D where you spend so much money to get one output that you're going to commercialize. At the same time, we recognize that the simultaneousness of invention is now escalated with artificial intelligence, that many people can feed a problem into AI right now and all get the same solution. So we didn't want to patent that type of technology where it was really the AI that was doing the work and the human didn't contribute enough. So I wonder if you could tell me, in view of the whole IP landscape, which is meant to incentivize innovation, creativity, is that being challenged now that AI exists? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think yes and no. I mean, these debates are so old. I mean, we were having them about like the Beastie Boys in the 90s, and whether when you remix, samples, that's copyrightable, or when it infringes on the rights of the artist who made those samples. When a sample is long enough that that you need to license it or get permission. If there's a particular 3 notes, is that lick, right? Something new or not. And I think that line is always going to be very blurry, and it's something that we're going to have to continue to renegotiate, as a society. But I certainly, agree very strongly with you that the idea that you just generate a prompt, you commission something with a prompt, and something comes out, which will be increasingly sophisticated, of course. Does that is that something that can be patented simultaneously or copyrighted simultaneously by everybody who issued the prompt? Obviously, that's a silly idea, and that subverts the entire point of having IP protections. So, we think a lot about AI as augmentative, both of human society and of human individuals, and so if you're just recording something, as a musician. If you just sample something and it's just the sample, that's very different from composing something new from those samples. And I think those distinctions continue to be, easy to make in most cases when it comes to novel IP. That's at least my personal sense.
I'll chime in on that. When we were huddled in the group earlier talking, I think you said something like, some things never change, or some things are the same, some things never change.
Oh, yeah, more things change, more they stay the same.
And one of the benefits of having an adult son who's a history buff is we're always talking about, weird little historical anecdotes. And I remember, now that I think about it, we were once talking about ancient Rome, and Roman potters, they would sort of sketch in a little symbol into their pots to make sure that their pots were known as their pots and not other people's pots, and they could charge relative to that. And so someone walk into a room, they could see whose pot is what, and they had ways to monetize their art, thousands of years ago. And this desire to protect your creation is not a new thing. It's not, it was true thousands of years ago. It'll be true today. But the nature of the art, the nature of the pottery is going to change, right? And not the desire to want to make money from it or share it with the world, whatever it is. So I think we have, and now we're talking about putting watermarks on deepfakes, right? Which is a conversation that wouldn't have made any sense 3,000 years ago. But obviously you have to evolve with it, with the technologies and new forms of creation. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing for us to acknowledge that we're in that teenage awkward phase, right? where you're just sort of trying to figure out, what things feel like as the technology changes, but some of those basic human desires don't change, but the mechanisms do. And I think that's what makes sense to me.
If I could also jump in really quickly, I'm sorry.
No, please, Danielle.
I also want to say, we're talking a lot about content, and I also want to bring in that Salesforce point of view that we're really thinking about a consumer application of this, but we should also be thinking about the business application for this. And I think our view is we should be engaging in another type of innovation, which is innovation around guardrails. How do we help the companies that are using our AI how are we helping them ensure they're doing it with trust, with safety, if they're making sure that they are preventing misuse of AI. And so I think those same guardrails that we're talking about, they have to be strong, they have to be easy to use. And I also think they're best used when there's a human there. So a lot of what Salesforce is talking about is human in the loop. And I think that is something that we've talked about with governments, that as long as they're looking at frameworks or guidelines, that to the extent that they can ensure that there is a human on the other side, that a lot of that misuse can be prevented. Some of these things, in terms of the more things change, the more they stay the same, the human element is still going to always, I think, be there, even though we are talking about technology.
That's great. And Maria, we talked a little bit earlier about this, and just you have an IP background, you mentioned. Would love your input on this. And we've been going back and forth on the patent between invention and then creativity, right? Creativity is the copyright side of things. Invention is more the patent side of things. Would love your perspective on this.
Yeah, I was really, I love the idea of creativity and the copyright in that area, what AI can bring to it. So basically, when we think of it as a tool, there are a lot of people that are not necessarily technically capable of drawing something, but they have a lot of creativity in them. And I think what is going to happen is we're going to be looking at creativity in different areas of life in a different way. Because a lot of those that were not creating anything, now all of a sudden have a voice, have a way of creating and producing new things in a completely different way. And I feel that is first of all, that is very exciting. The thing, how that will be assessed from copyright perspective, that's going to be interesting. But I think at the same time, this is a tool. This is another tool. We've been using different tools in creative industries, and now we have a new tool. It's going to take some time when people, learn to, first of all, ask the right questions. I think it's going to be overall for all of us to learn to ask the right questions so that we get the answers we want. That's going to be one of the key skills. But I think the whole idea that human creativity will still be the core of this and will need to remain the core of this. In general, in AI, humans need to remain in control. And there needs to be transparency when AI is involved. So these are kind of the ground rules, but otherwise I feel this is going to be an exciting journey when everyone starts creating, using, and relying on these co-pilots and assistants that are with them all the time.
May I just respond to that quickly? I feel emotionally very much in resonance with what you're saying, but I also think it's going to be a very tricky line to draw. And just as an example, or maybe I can offer two. One is when you take pictures with a camera nowadays. So my team made many of the AI features for Android and Pixel phones, and as digital photography has progressed, there's more and more algorithmic stuff going into the capturing of that photo, and there isn't really a line that says when does it stop being just the original pixels and when does it start being a deep fake. Yeah. For instance, there are technologies. Actually, Microsoft made one years ago, and using earlier technologies. Google has one now where you have a group shot. Everybody's always got their eyes closed, and at some point.
And you can change that.
Yeah, and if you take a series of shots quickly, and then you do kind of smart fusion, right? It can get everybody's eyes open. Is it a deep fake or isn't it? It's not simple to say. Or one of the ways that human augmentation with AI is so powerful is for people who can't see, can't hear, don't speak a language, have a cognitive impairment. We are already all cyborgs, all of us who are walking around with our phones, and that will increasingly be the case. The more these things replace capabilities that some of us lack.
Yeah.
And so at that point, is everything that I say, right? If it's being instantly translated by AI, become tagged, right, as AI generated or not? I don't know. So I'm just saying, it's a complicated question.
It's a complicated question, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're all here.
Yeah.
So these are the deep important questions that we need to address. And I think one of the things that I can't stress enough is how we do that in a responsible way. So that's like the ground rule that we need to figure out. How do we harmonize? How do we work on this so that it's not a siloed approach? How do countries come together and find these regulations and define these regulations in a way that benefit the world as a whole, and not just my company, my country, so that is something that needs to be happening, and I think these kind of events are important. in that respect.
I think, I'm sorry. So I do think it is happening. It's not done, but I do think more than any prior technology paradigm, the level of dialogue and genuine effort to harmonize is really profound. I mean, on Secretary Raimoto's team, Zoe Baird is her special advisor, and working across the G7 and the G20 and OECD and all the different groups, trying to harmonize. And there's many individuals, LM, obviously Tabasi and NIST and all the key folks in the US. But I see that same crew in every country. There's key advisors in the UK and key advisors in Brussels, and there's 30 or 40 now tech diplomats within foreign ministries across the world, from San Francisco to Tokyo. There's a very active core out of Singapore. There's just everyone is trying to harmonize. I mean, quite frankly, even at the Bletchley event in the UK, even China was at the table. Even China was one of the 14 nations, right? So I think more than any other, it doesn't mean they've solved the problem, but I do feel like the momentum is there.
The momentum is definitely there.
So I want to get to international in just a second. I will say that, Blaise, you talked a little bit about where does AI end, and it's going to be hard to figure that out. I will say one thing that we're also grappling with is where does a human end? So when we think about patenting, we look at it from the perspective of one of skill in the art and what they have access to and who they are, and whether the invention is obvious to one of skill in the art. And now that humans are augmented, we're going to be doing a request for comment soon on what does that look like and how should that impact AI and IP. First of all, I want to thank the panelists. I do think as we move forward, we do need to think about de-siloing. I know that we're doing that across US government. We're working directly with NIST and with Zoe and with others to make sure that, and with DOJ, with all aspects of government, to make sure we de-silo as we create the future, and that we do focus on agility, and that we don't try and reinvent the wheel. We're going to look at our past systems and see, do they work? Let's pressure test them out of the silo and figure out if that's enough. I also just want to emphasize that everybody recognizes we need to work globally. I will say, even when we put out our guidance that came out today, I reached out to the UAE, I reached out to other countries and said, here's what we've done, let's have a discussion. This is the start. We may need to adapt it based on what other countries are seeing. We may need to adapt it based on what stakeholders are seeing, because it's important that we build this right from the first instance. We know with standards, that's also a topic in IP. Countries are going in different directions. With IP systems generally, countries are trying to harmonize after the fact. And now we have an opportunity to what we've called pre-harmonize when it comes to a lot of the work we're doing. So appreciate you all being engaged in this discussion. Please thank my esteemed panelists for their contributions.